even some of you have the possibility to hop onto the Wachau train, which Walter was making some publicity for nicely this morning. Unfortunately not yet the people mover, but anyway, the Wachau train is there, almost waiting for you. And then of course you also need to get there somehow, and it's always this first and last mile problem. You might have, as the weather is so nice, and the area is so nice, have the idea of getting some bicycle, maybe some e-bicycle even, to be fashionable, to be trendy, and or to have less effort to go there, whatever. Okay, and you might book them by your app. So this is something which are already used, which we already used to, and. You just take the bike and go to the closest Wachau train station. You hop on the Wachau train. And maybe then if you are up there on a nice hill, on all those nice vineyards or apricot yards here you might also want to, I don't know, get some cabriolet car and, with your family, just drive around there. Okay? And now imagine that in all those mobility actions, if I may say so, because welcoming a new world of mobility, at least this is what it seems we are moving towards, you just never pay. Sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Too fantastic to be realistic, though, probably. Nonetheless, at the end of the month, with September, if you look at your bank account, still probably you would realize that it was not, you never really paid, but it was not free either. Okay, so every kind of full bicycle that you rent, that you used, you were charged a certain amount. Quite surely in this hilly area you might also, if you use it all day, have the need to recharge your bicycle. So you had to make use of a charging station. And I assume that the Wachau train is not yet free either, is it? But the point is, you never picked your credit card, or paid for anything. And this kind of scenario, it seems that it's not so far away. It's a scenario that is supposed to be enabled by blockchain. Or by, in general, distributed ledger technologies. So the idea of having the sole data, the fact that you used an e-bike, which is not your own e-bike, it's a mobility device that you just got for use, per use, for a certain number of kilometers in this, once again, magnificent area. Or whether you used a seat, maybe a very specific one, close to the window or whatever, in the Wachau train, a certain quality of seat, quality of service, for a specific time, in a specific place, on Saturday, in summertime. The sole data is already sufficient as a financial transaction. Because by having the data, the providers of those mobility assets, they know everything, don't they? So by having the data, they can charge you. Of course, they need to know your bank account. So they need to know you, they need to know the bank account, they need to know the e-bike that you used, they need to know exactly the seat in the Wachau train that you were using. That is to say, each kind of device, each kind of asset needs to have a unique identity. And welcoming Internet of Things. That's what we keep talking about. But having those identities available and their movements over time, their use over time, over tomorrow, Saturday for you specifically, if they only have that, of course, it's critical data. Yeah, because based on that you will be charged. And not anybody else. And also you also want to get charged only for the time used by whatever culture. Okay? So that supposes that such kind of infrastructure, where data is transported and where each data transport in the end corresponds to a financial transaction, needs to be secure and trusted. And that's what the blockchain or distributed ledgers in the end, distributed, highly distributed databases are supposed to be. I will put it that way. And you can imagine using this example of mobility, and you can imagine why I use this one in our community. Reveals to us, it shows to you that the blockchain by itself seems to have quite some transformational power, don't it? Because these kind of use patterns, you just use a series of assets that don't belong to you, and you're just charged by the amount of use, kilometers driven, time used, and the quality of service, the experience of using it. We are not really used to that so far. We're still in an ownership pattern. So I buy something, I buy a product, I use it, and I pay for the product, not for use. It's a shift in mindset. And to come back where I started from, you can imagine that in many sectors, this will lead to quite a few transformations, not only in mindset, but also in job roles, in skills and competencies that are required in order, in the last layer, in the end user layer, to use a specific asset that is here, but also along the food chain or the potential of the supply chain. Because you can replicate the pattern that I was visualizing for the end user, from the end user's perspective, also to the complete, and I don't use the word supply chain anymore, the word supply network, the ecosystem of suppliers. So they can interact in a similar way. And the CHAISE project is, I would say, in this community yet another blueprint, because this workshop's key characteristic trait is that it's sort of guided by blueprints. And you have heard a lot about drives already, and you heard a lot about Alberts. And somehow, if you add CHAISE, it's sort of the so far missing element for these infrastructure aspects concerning the end user layer, but also the whole supply network layer. And as ECQA, we've had the chance to be invited into this initiative. And the slide set that you have in the Moodle and the paper that you find in the proceedings, basically they describe what is the idea of CHAISE and what is the project's architecture. However, you understood already from my introduction that I won't spend too much time on those slides, because it's quite some data about the project, and I think it's quite easy to just get an overview of the project, but the key message I would like to convey is the role of blockchain distributed ledgers in our community, in our EuroAsiaSPI community, in our very much mobility-oriented, classically automotive, now mobility-oriented community, and also to, over the next editions of EuroAsiaSPI to start augmenting this aspect a little bit more, and the project will help us here, because it's only at the very beginning. As you see, November 2020 it started, and we already envisaged to have one keynote of the project, but it's still too early, because as you might remember from drives and all, but the first phase in such a project is always a needs analysis. Yeah? And you see this here in the expected outcomes, that we always start with a mismatch analysis. Yeah? So we're looking around, we have to look around what is available in terms of blockchain-based, blockchain-oriented trainings, even probably certification programs. There are already a few around. Both in the EET, so vocational education training area, but also in higher education training area. And we have been doing that, yeah, and by doing that, we were also confronted with something which, from my perspective, was also inherent in the design of the blueprint. That whereas for drives, we could say, okay, I mean, it's automotive sector, yeah, so people working in the automotive sector will be affected by new skill requirements. In all but, yeah, it's also somehow, I mean, battery-related skills, not only automotive, but still it's related to a specific, let's say, asset, or product. Whereas in the blockchain, if you have a transverse and inverse, or basically distributed database and trustworthy agreement mechanisms in this database, things like smart contracts and things like that, you understand it's sort of underlying technology, it's an enabling technology. So you're not really in a sector here, although it's still called sector, skill alliance, but it's not a sector. So we could just, you know, ask people coming from the automotive sector, people coming from the aerospace sector, or whatever. No, I mean, in the end, we would need to include everyone somehow. And another difficulty that brings, that is brought along with that, is that, of course, the consequences of, let's say, introducing such kind of distributed databases will be various and diverse depending on the specific sector. And that was also one of the first difficulties the project had and has been having in sort of evaluating this needs analysis, because what we found is that the key transformational potential is in people using existing assets. It's not so much, you know, blockchain programmers. I mean, it's a small community of highly specialized programmers with a very specific knowledge in mathematics and cryptography and things like that. Of course, that's a part of a skill target group, but still, of course, the by far vaster target group is all those professions that in the end every day work with IT systems, all those professions that work in purchasing departments, that are somehow confronted with a new way of making contracts, with a new way of handling financial transactions. Okay? And this made also the evaluation of work package 2, which was supposed to end sort of in May, more difficult than expected, and we could not have a keynote on the results of the study. But I think it's with Richard, it's almost fixed planned then for next year. And then in the meantime, you were able to read that for me, so I don't need to present it. It follows pretty much the standard structure that you know from the other two blueprints. So based on the needs analysis, we have to do a gap analysis. We need to propose a certain set of representative skills and competencies that are then also supposed, this is very important for the EU, I think Jakob has surely mentioned that the ECQA database where the Commission is trying to collect, to categorize European economy in different sectors, and per sectors define skill profiles. And then, of course, the idea is not only to do that in one specific country, of course, otherwise it wouldn't be an EU project, and also not just during the project, but to create in such a Europe-wide community. You see here the coverage is really quite good. a sort of initiative like the ESA that was presented here, and I assume that also CHAISE, at least part of CHAISE, will also join ESA somehow, because still these mobility ideas that should be transported in the ESA need some enabling infrastructure. You see that from the partnership point of view also the diversity between the so important sector representatives, so organizations like ECQA or BirdChain, these are all, let's say, blockchain fostering sort of associations, where companies, startups, and they become part of them and foster not only the technology development themselves, but in particular also their adoption in particular sectors. And we also have bigger companies inside like Fujitsu, and EIT providers, certifiers, and labor market research institutes who are mainly involved in all those studies. But, so the key mission is, of course, to have this ESCO profile, but also here to set up this strategy here, the European blockchain strategy. And we find that in some countries, Germany has published quite recently the strategy on blockchain adoption. Estonia, not astonishingly, for those countries is quite far already. Also France is coming up with one. Austria is still working on one, not yet released, but it's really a subject that all, at least as we've seen, the partner countries are quite deeply and actively engaged with. So it's not surprising that the EU was pushing for this kind of project. Okay, what do these milestones mean for our community? So there will be similarity to drives and all buts. There will be sort of a lot of studies that will be public, of course. But most importantly, there will also be training initiatives. So we are targeting for about 700 people trained in fundamental blockchain skills, and not only how blockchain works, but really also what is its transformational potential. This is for work package 2. I mean, what we have done so far. I think this is the slide I wanted to bring up here. This is what we proposed in the proposal. So from a consortium point of view, but of course all this will be adapted depending on the detailed outcomes then of the needs and gap analysis. So the idea is having really some sort of reference framework where then future training programs, existing training programs can be mapped against and have, this is what we currently envisage also from the ECQA perspective, CHAISE label, CHAISE compliancy label, so also to have some agreed guideline that is also, of course, in such a new, rapidly evolving technology to evolve at almost the same pace. Okay, as in the other projects, sort of startup trial phase, mainstream phase, a lot of dissemination work, and so on and so on. I would like to sort of close, it may not be so quick, but the talk and close the parent and come back to mobility again, so to our key area. And point you to one initiative which I believe is really instrumental and really structural, which is mobile. Anybody heard of that? The mobile initiative? Detlef, you have heard of it? Yeah. And it seems really to be something really impactful, an important one, because practically all the automotive tier 1s are partners, the OEMs are partners, IT companies are partners. So really a very serious thing, and also the way they work is very interesting. They set up similarities, we know it in our scale in Socrates, very target-oriented working groups. One working group, for example, just dealing with the new VIN, So, you know, already nowadays every vehicle has a unique identifier, which you can see behind the windscreen at the bottom typically. Yeah? The vehicle identification number, and this is supposed to be upgraded to a VID, to a VID, which will be this unique identifier, not only of the car itself, but really of this mobility asset within the Internet of Things, within the mobility economical ecosystem, as the mobile community call that. Just dealing with that, so the needs for such kind of bid. Or a working group dealing with the supply chain problematic. What does it mean to have, or what are also the new opportunities, thanks to having the possibility of having smart contracts. Not having to run through a phase of 6-8 months until a physical contract is signed, but having a sort of dynamic signature mechanisms, contract amendment mechanisms, which are supposed to render supply chains, supply networks, supply ecosystems much more agile and flexible. And other working groups. I only to cite 2 key working groups. Okay? So let me be lazy and just launch some mobile teaser video, which from my perspective brings along, it's also quite young, this initiative, so it's still sort of not yet photos, but rather sort of comics, drawings, but which from my perspective summarizes quite well what their vision is of this future mobility ecosystem and the role of blockchain as an enabler. So let me try that here.
Transportation systems, particularly in urban areas, are already overwhelmed by demand, putting strain on infrastructure and reducing traffic safety. According to the United Nations, urban populations will increase by 50% by 2050, making the effects of urbanization, including pollution and traffic congestion, incredibly difficult to manage. In many countries, vehicles tend to be the largest source of carbon emissions. In addition to the environmental impact, 1.25 million people die in traffic accidents per year across the globe. To mitigate the effects of vehicle congestion and overcrowding, cities need to develop new ways to manage road infrastructure and vehicle flow. Here at the Mobility Open Blockchain Initiative, we believe that we can leverage the convergence of rapidly maturing technologies, AI, IoT, and blockchain, to assign anything, a person, a vehicle, or piece of infrastructure with an identity. These digital identities can unlock the potential for a mobility network with intelligent entities that can perform transactions and communicate with each other. This, in turn, enables cities to build, operate, and finance their infrastructure in new and radically better ways. To enable and accelerate this transformation, MOBI and its members developed the first ever standard for a blockchain-based vehicle identity, VID. The VID can create a digital twin of a physical vehicle, unlocking potential for vehicle-to-infrastructure, V2I, and vehicle-to-everything, V2X payments from a car wallet, and eliminating the need for a payment account associated with a person or business. With a car wallet, a vehicle can pay as it moves on the road, allowing users to pay for infrastructure they utilize. In addition to road use, cities are also able to charge for congestion and carbon emissions. To offset these costs, users can sell services and data. Users can sell extra seats in their vehicles. Users can charge others to use their vehicles when not in use. Vehicles can also report flaws in infrastructure, accidents, and more in real time. Using the VID car wallets and tokens, users can also receive credit for using green or clean fuel, choosing public transit, or taking an alternative route. These charges and credits can be used to manage road network demand within the city, giving city managers, transit agencies, and infrastructure operators new tools to solve the biggest and least tractable urban mobility problems. The vehicle wallet could also act as a digital tracker and communicator for the vehicle. Having vehicle identities on a network allows vehicles to communicate speed, location, direction of travel, braking, and even intention. Coordinated mobility, taking advantage of trusted identities, swarm intelligence, and distributed positioning will permit vehicles to operate more safely and much faster in a given area. Mobi's VID, together with vehicle wallets and tokens, will permit infrastructure owners to charge users fees to pay for repair, maintenance, and new construction. This will revolutionize infrastructure finance, unlocking trillions of dollars of stranded capital, improving resource allocation, and more fairly distributing the financial burdens among citizens.
So the idea, of course, is moving away from this ownership, from this ownership perspective to a per-use perspective. You don't own your mobility asset anymore. But if you don't own it, you need providers. And the providers, of course, still, they need to design and they need to be paid. But what are they designing their mobility assets, cars, airplanes, trains for? Their infrastructure assets, traffic lights, you see here, charging stations. What are they designing them for? Currently we design for functional, non-functional requirements related to the asset, basically. Here, per use, the paradigm is we design for use cases. So the requirements, of course, they're still there, but they come from use cases that might be satisfied depending on the expected quality of service by totally different mobility assets. So for us, for the engineers, for designers, it's also a challenge to basically start one level higher, systems of systems, to think about requirements and how to map them, how to implement them to this layer. And this is where the mobile sees this sort of what they call, it's quite young, this term now, in this community, Sitopia. Where they say, they always have this, so there's this eierlegende Wollmilchsau. So the old capable infrastructure that is exactly the missing link that we need. And core of it is, in terms of technology enabler, a blockchain-based environment. And where you understood from the video, the money is supposed to go exactly where the value is created. So you've heard probably, if you paid attention, to the example, even infrastructure providers, they know your car was very heavy at that date. Or had some mechanical defect doing some scratching of the road or whatever, they could charge you more. Because you damage the infrastructure more than a normal driver with a very lightweight car and no scratching or whatever. And that's why sometimes, as we also just learned in that community, that sometimes the blockchain is said to be, they think it's a revolutionary potential as the internet, that it's sort of new internet, a value internet. So that's a little bit the terms that we are confronted here in our discussions and scenarios. Okay, so to sum up, key takeaways for you. There is another blueprint in our community, and we are very glad, I think, to be in that one, because I think it's really an important element in the mobility area for us, at least in the mobility area. And thanks to at least the ECQA being partner, we also have a direct, we're also in the board there, so we have quite some sort of lever there, and also access to information which we would like to really transport to the community, to Socrates and to EuroAsiaSPI, and make you part of that as much as possible.
That, of course, in order to enable all the scenarios you talked about, you need some security technology to ensure all those things. But I'm really a little astonished or even disappointed that in a project of that size, you dedicate yourself to one technology, namely this blockchain. Of course, it's en vogue, but there may be there are a lot of critical arguments against this, for example, energy consumption and so on, and there's no single work package elaborating on alternatives.
Yeah, thanks for the question. As said, first of all, you understood probably how we don't mention this specifically, but we have been invited to the partnership, the coordinators, and the project idea was, look, there's something like a blockchain popping up everywhere. No, I'm telling you, they're popping up everywhere, and somehow it's very difficult in Europe to know, what the hell is going on in each individual country, not only in terms of strategies anyway, but in particular also, what does it mean for the job market? And that gave the idea for creating, so knowing the pattern of the blueprint, creating, as I already said, Sektorskillerlines, for me it's not a skill, Sektorskillerlines, because it's enabling, on the blockchain, as a sort of almost buzzword, if I may say so. And you're totally right, but I believe, and I think as far as I got to know the consortium so far, as you have seen, it's quite young, and also for us, practically many of those partners we did not know before at all. And even they themselves are sort of discovering it's not only the blockchain. And also what are the specific challenges. Also what is popping up, if I may reuse them, which make you laugh or smile, is that everything is totally trusted and secure. We all know a little bit, at least if we have a little idea of cybersecurity, in every cybersecurity related system, we have an anchor of trust. So there's always a root. And if the root is not secure enough, or there is some entry point, then who tells me that what is happening in the blockchain is totally secure? And you know what was in the media just 2 weeks ago. Where I don't know how many billions of bitcoins just gone. But everything is totally secure, totally trusted. So of course, and I think this was also the part of your question, I totally join you. And to be honest, we also try to play a little bit that role in the consortium. To not only explain what is the blockchain history and what it is, all capable thing, but also to really give a very critical, have a very critical perspective, and we will really, from the other blueprints, there are a lot of partners, also influential partners, and you can't control everything, but what we will really stand in for sure is that also in the reference curriculum there are elements that are very critical elements, and also teaching to trainees and students to have a critical attitude towards the technology, as we should have with respect to every other technology. So many thanks for your criticism, positive criticism, which I appreciate a lot. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I can't hold
and then we have some questions from online community as well.
Okay.
First of all, thank you very much, Andreas, for your presentation. It kind of calms me down. The reason why I say this is I have some experience with this in financial terms, because I left the Standard Banks already a year ago. Standard Bank is old school for me meanwhile, so I'm very much into this blockchain world, and what I can tell you is I have also invested in companies which have already created an own ecosystem on blockchain technology, but it is all coming from Asia. Yeah? Australia is also involved, but there are companies that make billions of revenue already today, building their own ecosystem. It's mostly in the financial part and financial area, but they also spread into technical areas meanwhile. And I see the same potential as you do. It's just like the internet. And that, what I can tell you is, of course, it does produce carbon dioxide, but Europe slept concerning the technology of the internet completely. And we are about to lose contact here in this very area as well, as I can see it today. I don't see any company in Europe making billions of revenue on the blockchain technology. But what I can also see is, I believe just like with the internet, it's the most challenging thing to find legal and regulatory aspects. Because there are no borders anymore, the blockchain is distributed all over the world with the service that they are using. You mentioned this, and I think that this is one of the toughest things we need to, let's say, establish, not to run into this, let's say, pirate economy like we did with the internet as well. And we know that 20 years later now, we are fighting for regulatory things on the internet. We have huge discussions with Mrs. What's her name, Vestasha or something like this in Brussels. We are trying to regulate the large companies that usually come from the US at the moment. We will get the same thing with the blockchain companies here. And is this a major part of what you are doing in this as well? The legal and regulatory aspects?
I think that it's, you know, the role of the blueprints is always, the focus always on required skills and competencies. Yeah? And what our role, I think, has to be is to include the need for having a clear idea of what at least is needed, what should be there in terms of regulatory and other associated aspects. Because I would step, many thanks for the input, by the way, because I would step even further. I think it's not even done with regulation, because I always ask, where's the police? Who understands what is going on? Who in the end understands what's going on underneath? But it's exactly, so may I just leave it at that point for the answer, because this is exactly what we were hoping for and expecting, and what we have the panel discussion for 1 hour in the afternoon for this kind of aspect, because it's totally right. There's so many aspects which are, from my perspective, totally unsolved. And as you say, because you were already explicit, also, especially in Europe, I would say, not sufficiently well addressed. But even if they will be addressed, I claim that we are moving more and more towards, in some areas we are already in, otherwise the gaps could never have grown so big. There's just no police anymore. I leave it at that, okay?
Thank you. Okay, we have the time for last question. We have an online question. Maybe
I did not see one because there was still question.
yeah, there is some golden hand. If it's
a golden hand. Oh, Noah, yeah. A golden hand. Yes.
First of all, thanks for the presentation. And secondly, what I understood from the video that the motive behind this idea was that the population is increasing and the traffic jam is not going to be manageable anymore. And you mentioned something like in the year 2050, that's 50 actually, we will increase by 50%. And after you showed us the solution, I could not really understand how is that going to decrease the population or at least utilize the usage of the streets. What I understood is that if I don't have money to pay, I should not go where I want to go. So you can elaborate more how this idea is going to solve the issue.
Yeah, sure, Noah. So if I got you right, just to repeat the question is, so what's the role of the blockchain and mobile in addressing societal challenges as population growth and migration, everything was not cited, but all those really mega challenges. So if I got you right. And the answer is, in their video, they just used this as an introduction to say there is a need to change mobility. Yeah? So it was a need, so the automotive industry and other industries are in the need of rethinking mobility because there is not only population growth, but also urbanization. Yeah? So more and more people move into urban areas. Yeah? And mobility needs in an urban area are totally different from rural areas. Yeah? And so they're you know, the need to hang up the picture, the Aufhänger, was to say, okay, there will be a need to move towards a new mobility paradigm. But in order to implement that paradigm, we also need a new sort of infrastructure. At least that's how I understood their video. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I don't think that blockchain or any car will contribute to the fact that we will have less children in the future, something like that. But at least that's how I interpret it. Okay?